Finally, Hulk Hogan is exposing why so many wrestlers don't like Triple H, even if he has never been a big admirer, from Bret Hart to Vince McMahon. But what Triple H just revealed is worse than Hogan's racial acts and union-breaking past. Let me clarify. This is the height of betrayal. As you may already be aware, Hulk Hogan was not exactly known for his loyalty, and one of his worst betrayals infuriated Vince McMahon and Triple H. Consider this. Hogan had just left the WWE in 1994 during the controversy surrounding the drug trial. But instead of fading into oblivion, he pulls a maneuver that really took Vince McMahon by surprise. He joins WCW, WWE's biggest rival. This was more than just a commercial decision. Personal warfare was at play. McMahon felt completely duped when Hogan defected to WCW in June 1994. Hogan has become a great star thanks to McMahon. Suddenly, the opposition hired his golden kid. In the Netflix documentary, Mr. McMahon, Vince revealed the extent to which this directly impacted him. After transforming Hogan into a huge success, he said Hogan turned to their adversary, which saddened him. At this point, Hogan's choice is deadly from a human perspective, but completely genius from a business one. Instead of just becoming another face in UCW, Hogan performed one of the most shocking heel changes in wrestling history at Bash at the Beach, 1996. He became the mysterious third man, joining Scott Hall and Kevin Nash to construct the New World Order. This heel turn was a first for wrestling, but it also exposed a more sinister aspect of Hogan's character. For the first time, he could finally be the shrewd, egotistical politician that his peers had tolerated for years. He was no longer required to portray Hollywood Hulk Hogan as the all-American hero. And let's be honest, it was very interesting. To watch this Hogan, the New World Order helped WCW win the ratings battle for 83 weeks in a row, and during that time, they almost went bankrupt. Behind the scenes, Hogan's behavior allegedly worsened. Take Billy Kidman, for example. This talented high-flyer was trying to make a name for himself in WCW. However, after claiming that Kidman couldn't draw flies at a flea market, Hogan is rumored to have publicly buried him. Eric Bischoff claims that Hogan hated up-and-coming talent and exploited his creative power to stifle it in order to maintain his own standing. We frequently witness this behavior with Hogan. Instead of using his influence to benefit the next generation, he allegedly utilized it to maintain his position at the top. Regardless of what was best for the organization or his fellow wrestlers, the most shocking betrayal was still to come. Hogan returned to WWE in 2002 when McMahon acquired WCW. When he faced The Rock at WrestleMania X8, the crowd responded so enthusiastically that WWE had to flip him face again after first bringing him back as a villain. As a result, any one of the most controversial title reigns in wrestling history. The plot revolves around the 2002 hostility between Hogan and Triple H following an 8-month injury layoff and victory at WrestleMania. Triple H lost the undisputed title to Hogan at Backlash 1 month later. For this, there was no long-term strategy. On the day of the event, the decision was made at the last minute due to Hogan's immense popularity. Imagine now that you are Triple H in that situation. After a career-threatening injury, you recently made an incredible recovery. After being the main attraction at WrestleMania as champion, you are told on the day of the pay-per-view that you are handing over the title to a part-timer in his late 40s. In his 2004 autobiography, Making the Game, Triple H let out his rage, saying that he was a proven ratings draw and that losing so swiftly stopped his momentum. Here's what makes this even more intriguing. When asked if he would ever face an elderly Hogan in a hypothetical match, Triple H responded angrily years later, in That statement accurately captures the disdain that many wrestlers had for Hogan over the years. The elderly veteran still had little respect for Hogan, as evidenced by Triple H's harsh comment about having a dustpan to clean him up. The wrestling community saw Hogan's exploitation of his fame and backstage contacts to bring himself into the main event picture as classic Hogan politics, regardless of what was best for the other wrestlers or the company's long-term survival. But this is where things start to get very crazy. At this point, the discriminatory acts that would eventually damage Hogan's reputation start to show. Hogan was behaving in ways that were inconsistent with his true self at the same time that he was portraying himself as this beloved returning hero. A 2007 sex tape that was leaked in 2015 showed that Hogan had often used racial epithets and made racist comments about his daughter's dating life. We're talking about the unwords many applications events, as well as statements that, in part, conveyed his displeasure of his daughter's interactions with black guys, including "I am a racist." This wasn't a single mistake or a momentary collapse. In judgment, Hogan's actual character was revealed by this discriminatory mental habit. When he thought no one was listening, we immediately dismissed him, removed him from programming, and withdrew him from the Hall of Fame. It was discovered that the man who had argued for treating everyone fairly and believing in oneself was deeply prejudiced. The wrestling world reacted swiftly and brutally. CM Punk, who had previously expressed his dislike for Hogan's politics and ego, became much more vocal in his condemnation following the racial revelations. MVP publicly referred to Hogan as a racist in interviews, stating bluntly that his behavior on TV qualifies him as such. However, this is what infuriates wrestlers of color even more. They had to work with this man since he genuinely cared for them. They had to shake his hand, follow his advice, and seem to appreciate him even while he was harboring these racist beliefs. In addition to being professional, the betrayal was deeply emotional. Hogan's WCW colleague Scott Steiner was unapologetic. In his assessment, using his political power to bury talent while maintaining racial attitudes in the background, he called Hogan a jerk. The most negative aspect of this understanding was that it put everything Hogan had done throughout his career in a different context. All of a sudden, his backroom politics, his selective coaching, and his reluctance to put over black wrestlers started to make much darker sense. Take Mark Henry as an example. After Hogan's racist comments were made public, Henry revealed that he had turned down WWE's offer for Hogan to tour black schools as an apology, because he felt that Hogan had not genuinely repented of his racism. This illustrates how serious the damage is. Even efforts at reconciliation were seen as inauthentic and self-serving. The affair also exposed Hogan's propensity to lie and embellish, even under the most extreme situations. His initial apologies showed a fundamental inability to understand why his comments were so hurtful, concentrating more on getting caught on tape than on the actual content of his racist statements. Meanwhile, Hogan was dealing with his own family's dilemma, which was being publicly displayed. He was charged with adultery during his turbulent 2007 to 2009 divorce from Linda Hogan, including allegedly having an affair with their daughter Brooke's best friend. Linda accused Hogan of being violent and a sex addict, and their family disputes on their VH1 show, Hogan Knows Best, grew worse during the divorce. The family's problems were exacerbated in 2007 when his son, Nick, was involved in a devastating car accident. Nick was 17 when he crashed while racing, severely injuring passenger John Graziano, who now requires lifelong care due to brain damage. During Nick's 8-month jail sentence, Hogan made derogatory comments about the crash being God's will, according to leaked jail conversations. But perhaps the most telling aspect of Hogan's character at this time was his relationship with money and legal issues. According to reports, he was a family guy dealing with personal setbacks. But the sex tape that exposed his racist comments also led to a major court battle against Gawker. The media site was forced out of business after Hogan, with the assistance of billionaire Peter Thiel, forced Gawker to pay $140 million in damages. This was seen as a victory for private rights, but it also showed that Hogan was willing to use extreme legal measures to protect his reputation, even if those actions were founded on dishonesty and hypocrisy. The Gawker lawsuit brought in roughly $31 million for Hogan, subsequent settlements, but it failed to improve his reputation among his colleagues. Wrestlers who had been enduring Hogan's backstage politics for decades attested to the stark contrast between his public persona and his private life. This period is significant because of the cumulative effect of Hogan's acts across the decades. A person who consistently put his own interests ahead of others, no matter the cost, was the subject of racist comments in the 2000s. Backstage politics in the 1990s, and the union betrayal in the 1980s. Triple H's new revelations become significant. At this moment, as someone who worked directly with Hogan and witnessed his behavior firsthand, Triple H's comments about the reasons why wrestlers hate him are extremely important to me. But we're talking about more than just differences in professional opinion or creativity. We're talking about fundamental character issues that affect all wrestlers. Business. That was merely the preamble to what we will now talk about: Hogan's questionable behavior in the 1980s and early 1990s. The most hated man in professional wrestling. Prior to exploring the full chaos that is Hulk Hogan's reputation in the world of professional wrestling, let's set the scenario. Consider this. Wrestling had the potential to gain widespread popularity in the 1980s. At the center of this rise stands a giant with a blonde mustache who would go on to become the Duff Skoo. We would go on to become the face of sports entertainment, Terry Hulk Hogan Blee. But this is where things start to get very crazy. Millions of fans were shouting, "What are you going to do, brother?" flaunting their 24-inch pythons. While Hogan was reportedly making moves behind the scenes that would make even the most vicious company CEO blush. The person in question started wrestling in 1977 after receiving instruction from famed Japanese trainer Hiro Matsuda. But his rise too along the way, several really questionable decisions were made. Let's look at where this came from. Hogan's entry into the wrestling business wasn't exactly straightforward. Despite having joined the WWF in 1979 under Vince McMahon Sr., he was fired in 1981 for participating in Rocky III without permission. But here's the worst part. When Vince McMahon Jr. took over and bought WWF from his father in 1982, Hogan saw opportunities. He returned him in December 1983. This is where the plot really goes haywire. On January 23, 1984, Hogan defeated the Iron Sheik to win his first WWF World Heavyweight Championship at Madison Square Garden, sparking the start of Hulkamania. There was more to this match than merely a wrestling match. This was the start of a cultural shift that will change the entertainment sector forever. But here's the crazy thing. Hogan was talking about training as he developed into this legendary character, saying he was taking vitamins and praying, but he was also doing things that would utterly destroy his reputation among his peers. Decades later, wrestlers are still criticizing him for a behavior that is so controversial. The first major warning flag is the union problem. Picture this scene. In 1986, just before WrestleMania 2, Jesse the Body Ventura tried something new, established a wrestlers' union. We're talking about basic worker rights here. Injury protection, higher income, and health benefits. These wrestlers were uninsured, independent contractors who put their lives at danger every night. But this is where Hogan allegedly showed his true self. Instead of supporting his fellow wrestlers, Hogan allegedly alerted McMahon about the union's plans, which led to threats of firing and effectively ended the notion. After making this startling admission, Ventura said that Hogan had betrayed him, which resulted in Ventura's dismissal. Now imagine yourself in that same moment as Jesse Ventura, while you're trying to improve the locker room for everyone. Your alleged friend disparages you in order to support his own position. Ventura has called Hogan a backstabber and a narcissist in a number of interviews. And is he truly to blame? Hold on though, because things get worse. In a 1991 lawsuit, McMahon claimed that Hogan informed him of the union's plans and that Ventura collected $81,333 in royalties. This was not just a case of backstage gossip. This was confirmed by court testimony. The consequences of this betrayal cannot be overstated. Wrestlers continue to sustain injuries without the proper protection, and there is currently no wrestling union this episode, in which Hogan allegedly prioritized his own interests over the requirements of the whole locker room, can be connected to each time a wrestler sustains an injury and is unable to pay for the necessary medical care. Now, let's talk about what was happening when Hogan was at his best. From 1984 to 1993, this man was virtually invincible. He attracted huge crowds, held the WWF Championship for a record 1474 days, and was the main attraction at 8 of the first 9 WrestleManias. On NBC's The Main Event, 33 million viewers saw his 1988 fight against Andre the Giant. In the US, that remains a wrestling TV record. However, beneath all of this success, there were rumors there. The wrestlers talked about Hogan's backstage politics, creative control agreements, and his refusal to put other talent over. This is the real source of the terms politicking and wrestling. Hogan was regarded as the master of these concepts. Think about, for example, Bret Hart. This man, a wrestling legend and technical mastermind, radiated respect in every locker room he walked into. Hart, on the other hand, spoke candidly about Hogan. Hart accused Hogan of abusing his position of authority to prevent him from winning the WWE Championship in 1993. Despite alleged plans for Hart to have a legitimate run with the title. Do I like Hulk Hogan? No, I don't. He is, in my opinion, a phony Bret Hart. Sincerity without pretense. Hart called Hogan a one-out Tove 3 wrestler who couldn't distinguish between a headlock and a floodlight, and accused him of abusing his position of authority. When a wrestler of Hart's caliber and reputation calls you out like this, you know, there's a genuine beef, but the Hart case gets even more complicated. At WrestleMania 9th in 1993, there were reportedly plans for an actual show finale, but Hogan allegedly persuaded McMahon to modify the conclusion. In a surprising match, Hogan defeated Yokozuna to win the title instead of Hart, depriving Hart of what should have been his moment. Hart has never forgotten this episode, which he describes as a black eye and a betrayal. More political plotting was required. During his time in WCW, Hogan's creative impact became increasingly challenging. Think about the infamous encounter against Sting in Starrcade 1997. What should have been a moment of glory for Sting is claimed to have been spoiled by Hogan's stubbornness to lose cleanly. Other wrestlers lost all respect for the characters. Machismo as a result of this behavior. Let's talk about The Undertaker as well. This dude is the pinnacle of professionalism in wrestling. Someone who doesn't frequently act inappropriately or disparage his peers. Nevertheless, The Undertaker has issues with Hogan in order to avoid jobbing cleanly. Hogan was accused by The Undertaker of making up a neck injury he had while driving a tombstone pile in 1991. This undermined their faith, The Undertaker said early in his career. And from someone as respected as The Undertaker, it is a serious accusation. But perhaps the most damaging aspect of Hogan's behavior was his hypocrisy. He was reportedly behaving in ways that were completely inconsistent with the image of a clean living all-American hero that he was attempting to instill in millions of kids by urging them to take their vitamins. pray and work hard in their training. One such example is the situation with steroids. In defiance of Vince McMahon's advice to come clean, Hogan denied misusing steroids and said he only used them temporarily for injuries when he appeared on the Arsenio Hall show during McMahon's federal prosecution for trafficking steroids in the early 1990s. McMahon had warned Hogan not to lie about it, but Hogan did it anyway. When prosecutors asked Hogan to testify in 1994, he was granted immunity and stated that he had been using steroids for almost 13 years, starting in 1976. Contrary to his public statements, he was shown to be someone who would lie to protect his name and possibly toss people under the bus when it suited him. The pattern is clear here. Hogan consistently put his own interests ahead of those of his friends, colleagues, and the business that made him famous and wealthy. This isn't just a wrestling political issue. His peers could see that he was seriously lacking in ethics, even if the fans couldn't. The final count, the final chapter of this very insane story has arrived. And to tell the truth, this is where everything comes full circle in the most amazing way possible. We're talking about Hulk Hogan's final years, his death on July 24, 2025, and how the most controversial figure in wrestling's complex reality was revealed by Triple H's tribute. But before we get to that romantic conclusion, we need to talk about something that shows how widespread Hogan's terrible conduct pattern is: his political connections and how they exposed a whole new audience to his true self. In the 2020s, Hogan became increasingly vocal about his backing of Donald Trump. And trust me when I say that this association set off some of his most controversial moments, because Hogan spoke at the 2024 Republican National Convention, backed Trump, and joked about Bodie's hitting Claw Harris at rallies. Many people saw his comments as racist and misogynistic. This political convergence was not solely due to personal beliefs. It revealed a pattern of behavior that wrestlers had been subjected to for a long time. When Hogan appeared at the WWE in 2025, he was being jeered by crowds at events because they understood his public persona had always been a well-constructed lie. The most significant event occurred in 2024 and concerned his Real American Beer Company. Hogan allegedly replaced his black beer ambassador, Essie Janai, with white influencers after learning of her race. Janai shared proof on social media that sparked a massive uproar, proving that Hogan's racist beliefs persisted. These were enduring issues that nevertheless affected real people's lives. Now, let's talk about a subject that illustrates the depth of hostility for Hogan and the professional wrestling industry. The vast majority of famous wrestlers who have openly voiced their disagreements with him. This is not just about a few angry employees. We are talking about Hall of Famers, big event stars, and industry luminaries. Bruno Sammartino is one of the most prestigious victory. Had serious issues with Hogan's business plan, according to wrestling history. Despite the fact that many people thought he was a huge draw, Sammartino said he was never impressed with the quality of his ring performances. For someone of Sammartino's quality, this was a damning indictment of Hogan's entire career. Another renowned wrestler, Shawn Michaels, had a violent run-in with Hogan's ego during their 2005 SummerSlam bout. Hogan's failure to lose cleanly prompted Michael to resort to overselling. Michaels claims that after initially framing their dispute as good guy versus good man, Hogan changed his mind and insisted on the more conventional heel versus babyface booking, which suited him. Nonetheless, some of the most damning testimony came from wrestlers who had collaborated with Hogan in other promotions and had noticed consistent behavioral patterns. In TNA wrestling, AJ Styles claimed that Hogan never brought up or promoted TNA, which led Styles to believe that TN felt embarrassed to be associated with the advertising. The international wrestling community was also impacted by Hogan's activities. During his time with New Japan Pro Wrestling in Japan, He has been accused of cultural insensitivity and a resistance to adapting to different wrestling customs and techniques. The fact that Hogan's actions affected different generations of wrestlers just emphasizes how significant all of this is. Older wrestlers like Bruno Sammartino and Bob Backlund say he changed wrestling from an athletic competition to pure entertainment, often by employing political shortcuts instead of competence. Backlund openly denounced Hogan's use of steroids, saying he wasn't a suitable role model for young people or a representative of the industry. Conversely, wrestlers from the Attitude Era and beyond viewed Hogan as someone who was not eager to develop or elevate younger talent. Before his tragic death, Hogan was a highly political man. According to Chris Benoit, who worked with him in WCW, modern wrestlers have been far more direct in their criticism. MJF didn't hold back while calling Hogan a racist and a liar in interviews. This represents a new generation of wrestlers that grew up knowing about Hogan's controversies and were not influenced by nostalgia for his heroic reputation from the 1980s. Together, these testimonies paint a picture of a man who consistently prioritized his own interests over those of the wrestling community, his fellow rivals, and even basic human decency. This transcends backstage politics and artistic differences. This relates to fundamental flaws in his character that affected everyone who worked with him. Now let's discuss Hogan's death and the reactions it provoked, the story's most moving aspect. On July 24, 2025, Terry Hulk Hogan Bollea died of cardiac attack at his Florida home at the age of 71. The wrestling community had to deal with the complicated legacy of one of its members' biggest stars. Triple H, the current Chief Content Officer for WWE, was given the difficult chore of praising someone whose behavior has been problematic for decades. But in reality, his response told us a lot about the true nature of Hogan's wrestling industry relationships. For many of us, being able to call someone a friend was an honor. In reality, millions of people throughout the world were captivated and inspired by him. Triple H narrated a heartfelt video package for WWE SmackDown on July 25, 2025, calling Hogan the ultimate superstar who inspired millions of people. Terry Hulk Hogan Bollea was one of the few, if any, individuals who helped shape WWE into what it is now, he claimed in a social media post. However, this is what makes Triple H's tribute so fascinating. It was carefully crafted to acknowledge Hogan's impact without minimizing the controversies. Triple H has never publicly stated the reasons. Despite the fact that wrestlers hate Hogan, his composed response to his death told us a lot about the complex feelings that exist among the wrestling community. Fans' reactions to Hogan's death were equally complex. Innumerable social media condolences were shared by people who grew up watching Hulkamania. But there was also a great deal of criticism from people who couldn't help but link the man to his actions. Posts on X, the former Twitter platform, ranged from expressing sorrow over the death of a childhood hero to calling attention to his anti-UN and racist statements. One of the most intriguing aspects of the post-death discussion was how it exposed the generational divide among wrestling fans. Older fans who remember the 1980s boom era were more inclined to highlight Hogan's positive achievements, whereas newer fans who grew up knowing about his controversies were less sympathetic. The wrestling press's coverage of Hogan's death also demonstrated this complexity. Both the scandals and his important contributions to the popularity of wrestling were highlighted in obituaries that hurt his reputation. Numerous articles treated the union betrayal, the backstage politics, and the racial insults as crucial elements of his legacy. It's fascinating how Hogan's death forced the wrestling business to confront some challenging truths about its past. The union issue in particular has garnered increased attention because many of the problems Ventura was trying to fix in the 1980s still affect wrestlers today. Despite his own recent difficulties and legal woes, Vince McMahon published a tribute to Hulk, stating, "Despite our ups and downs, Hulk was a brother." He noted their complex and often contentious past. Their friendship is summed up in this comment alone: successful but complicated, profitable but problematic. Perhaps the most revealing aspect of the post-death discussion was how it highlighted the ongoing consequences of Hogan's actions. Modern wrestlers observe that the lack of a union in the WWE, the ongoing issues with diversity and wrestling, and the persistent issues with healthcare and working conditions are all products of decisions made during Hogan's tenure. Other modern wrestlers, such as Seth Rollins, have publicly shown their love for Hogan. Rollins publicly denounced Hogan's racism and voiced his dislike for his style in interviews. This is indicative of a new generation of wrestlers who don't hesitate to question authority, even when that authority is represented by a deceased renowned figure. The worldwide wrestling community also talked about Hogan's legacy, with several promotions and wrestlers from Mexico, Japan, and Europe sharing stories about his behavior while traveling abroad. These stories painted a picture of someone who was difficult to deal with and contemptuous of other wrestling cultures. A comprehensive analysis of Hulk Hogan's career and aftermath reveals a story of exceptional achievement, predicated on deviant behavior. Has certainly changed wrestling by making it more widely known and establishing the benchmark for sports entertainment that still exists today. That accomplishment, though, came at a cost to many wrestlers whose careers were influenced by Hogan. Not just to Hogan, we appreciate you watching. To see our other fascinating content, click on your screen.